Steve Beauchamp, and today I'm going to be talking to you about something that potentially, if you really unpack it and really kind of absorb this into the way that you do your work, could really change how you approach building your personal strategy for yourself and also how you approach problem solving in general. And so the practice I'm referring to is the practice of kaizen. Kaizen is, as many people in the business world should know by now, it's been around. That particular term has been around the Western world for many decades, so this shouldn't be brand new, but it's a term that, is really made up of two different words and two kanji characters. And most of the time, whenever you say the word kaizen, people automatically think, continuous improvement. But I feel like, some of the meaning gets lost when you just think about it that way. So let me elaborate just a little bit. So the first word, kai, can be translated as change. And the second word of zen can be translated as good or better. And when you put the two of them together, you end up with something to the effect of change for the better. You could also think about it in terms of having to tear something down in order to rebuild it better, right? So it potentially can be just an adding on, right? So like a constant improving of something that's there, but it could also be a little bit more destructive initially in order to get a better result in the end. So when you say continuous improvement, I don't know, I think it gets a little lost. And so, and it probably by now you should have heard of, the power of kaizen to really transform organizations and industries. And a lot of the time, if you really start doing some study on it, you realize that the organizations that do this well will improve, the flow of their processes. So it just seems like they move information, they move product, they move the work, right? So air quotes on the work. And it becomes more synchronous and quality improves, right? So all of those three things are true in organizations that really deploy kaizen well. I think, though, a lot of times in the Western world, we kind of think about applying kaizen only to, we only need to think about this kind of thinking and these types of things down, closer to the nuts and bolts of the work. This doesn't apply to, everybody else in the organization. But in fact, if you read any literature by a man by the name of Masaki Imai, you discover that he's written several times that kaizen is all about thinking that this is something that everybody should be doing with every piece of work all of the time, right? So this isn't meant for just like some people in the organization and not for others. And so when you think about the fact that continuous improvement professionals are part of an organization, or if you're a freelancer, or if you're a contractor, you're still part of that process. So you can't take yourself outside of that. You need to be thinking about, how does this apply to the work that we do? And, when I think about kaizen, it's really about focusing on being more effective first, and then thinking about improving efficiency. And I think a lot of times everybody tries to do it the other way around. And, the problem with that is that, when you think about effectiveness is about ensuring that you're working on the right things at the right time, right? So could think about this in a different way. It's about being organized and removing, muda or waste from your process as much as you possibly can, right? So that's effectiveness. And efficiency is really about ensuring that you're doing the work on the right things in the best possible way. Thought of another way, it's about setting and adhering to a standard or standard work, if you will. And so if you try to do those in the reverse order, how could you possibly figure out how to work on the right things in the best possible way if you don't know what those things are first? I mean, it seems pretty straightforward to me. So today I want to talk, a little bit more about that and how this applies to a personal workflow. Yeah. So this is really not thinking about this in terms of the organization so much as it is about the individual. Okay. So let's explore this. So first off, let's talk about, the practice of kaizen it's all about learning to focus on, those things that I talked about already. It's learning to focus on the flow. It's learning to focus on the synchronicity. And it's really learning to focus on quality. So when you start applying that kind of a focus to your workflow, I mean, if you just take a step back and think about it, it's like, well, you could really think about your workflow as a process. Oftentimes we don't think about it that way. But if you really did take a step back and thought about your work that way, then you could think about, how would I improve the flow? How would I make this more synchronous? And how can I think about improving the quality of the work I do? And so, I think we all should be thinking about, how can we make the work we do easier and use less resources, particularly our time. I mean, that's one of the most important resources that we have. And when we start thinking about it in that context, we're going to naturally find opportunities that we didn't know existed. And, when you think about the clients you work with, you probably teach them all the time. It's like, okay, you need to start thinking critically, and you need to start, thinking about your process in a different way. And how often, though, do we not do the same thing? It's like we're, kind of giving a prescription to somebody that we're not willing to take. And when we kind of approach our work that way, what ends up happening is we start feeling like a fraud. We start feeling like, oh, well, no one's going to listen to me because I'm not actually doing this stuff. And you don't really believe in the things that you're teaching, which is a huge problem. And so think about your workflow, in the context of, there are characteristics and behaviors that are true in that process that you absolutely have control over and that you can change. I mean, you do have a certain level of autonomy to do the work that you do. I mean, I believe that that's true. I've known hundreds of CI people throughout my career. A lot of them will say to me, yeah, I have some control over how I do the work I do and how I spend my time. Because if you didn't have some control over that, how the hell would you be successful leading any of the work you do? You have to be able to have the ability to say, yep, we're going to do this, or nope, we're not going to do that. So when you start thinking about your own work this way, start thinking about how you can apply that critical thinking lens to your work. Because when you start doing it that way, you start asking yourself some of those hard questions, right? You start asking yourself, well, what's possessing me to do the work the way I'm doing it? And why would I do it that way? And sometimes the answer is, well, that's just the way I've always done it. How many times have you heard that in your work? But the reality is, we say those things. If someone was to talk about how we do our work, we say that exact thing. And I've caught myself doing that, over the years. And that's why I've made it a conscious effort to not do that. And now it sounds really easy, right? Oh, just apply critical thinking. But it's not really that simple in actuality and in application. And so, if you're thinking about this and you're like, well, shit, that is going to be a challenge for me to be able to do by myself. So my advice to you is find a friend that you can have these conversations with, a colleague. If nobody exists around you that kind of fits that description, hire a coach. Or if you're really good, train your dog, get somebody to help you with this, because I guarantee you that we do a really great job of rationalizing the results we're getting, and we rationalize the decisions we make on the processes we use. I mean, it happens all the time. We see the same thing when we're working with our clients, don't we? And so, be ruthless on your process, and, but be easy on yourself, right? I mean, that we all say that all the time too. It's all about the process. So, if this is resonating with you, and you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to my channel. I'm going to be posting a lot more content like this as time goes on. And who knows, maybe I'll find some people to interview, and you can, see some really fun interviews on here. There's also, so far there's one interview of me that I've done. So I threw that up on the channel, and so check it out. Yeah, I look forward to, having you stay connected with me in the future. So let's, get back to Kaizen. So the thing about Kaizen that I've learned that is extremely important when you start thinking about the critical thinking piece is that you have to start thinking about the power of the word no, and not like KNOW, but NO, no. Okay. So in your improvement work with your process, or anybody else's process for that matter, you should be thinking about how to make improvements to your workflow, to somebody else's process, without adding extra things, right? So, but let's get specific. Let's talk about you. Let's talk about your workflow. I mean, that's why you're here, right? So you should be thinking about how to make improvements to your workflow with no extra setup time or time in general, no extra technology tools. And God, don't we all love those fucking technology tools, right? I mean, they're all over the damn place, and it's hard to figure out which one's which. But I mean, there's so many options out there. But don't take the bait, okay? Try to do this without any extra technology. Don't do any unnecessary analysis, right? Obviously, you need to do some analysis, but don't do over and above. Like, don't get into analysis paralysis is basically what I'm saying, okay? Look at the information, make a decision, and move. No extra rework, right? I mean, think about your workflow. Think about how many meetings that you schedule that get canceled, or that get canceled on you, or that, meeting agendas weren't, set up quite right in the first place. And so you didn't really get the outcomes you wanted. So now you got to do another meeting to get the information that you really wanted. I mean, we've all been there. No extra people to do the work for you. Okay. Don't do it, because how do you know if all of the work that you're doing is actually the right work in the first place? Have you actually took a step back to really figure out if there's a work that I'm doing right now consistent in alignment with the strategy that I have for the work that I believe I'm supposed to do? Is that also connected to my professional pursuit, right? And also you as an individual, right? So if you want to know a little bit more about what I mean by that, go back and watch episodes 1 through 3, and I break it all down in those videos. So go back and check them out if you haven't checked them out yet. What's interesting is, like, you're going to be surprised just how much your creativity starts to open up when you start, approaching possibility and opportunity in your problem solving in this way. Because you're not going to approach it from the assumption that, oh, I just need this extra thing, or I just need this thing that somebody else is doing, because the reality is their situation is not yours. My situation is not yours. Your situation is not mine. And so don't just try to carbon copy somebody else's process and results and expect to get the same outcomes, because it's probably not going to be true. That's not going to get you what you want. And so, I like to think about this little story. I don't know if it's a parable or if it's actually true. But there was a story that I heard about a farmer in Africa, and he owned, this plot of land. And, he, worked the land for a while, and then started hearing about, oh, there's like these different, diamond mine type things that are being discovered on people's land. And they're making like lots of money and all these things. And so he started thinking, oh man, that's what I need to do. I need to go buy some land somewhere, because, this land is no good, right? It's not working for me. I'm not doing so well. So he sold it to this other guy, and then went and, bought another piece of land. And in the conversation he was having with the guy that he sold it to, like as he was leaving, he's like, yeah, there's just nothing here. The only thing is like, there's this little creek that runs through here, and it's, it's just full of a bunch of rocks. I mean, there's nothing in there. And so, and the creek dries up often. It's just not, it's just not super helpful. And so anyway, goes about his way, purchases another piece of land, and starts working the land, looking for diamonds and whatnot. Meanwhile, the other individual that bought his land, turns out that there was this giant diamond deposit, and these rocks in the river were actually diamonds. They just weren't polished. They weren't cut. And like uncut diamonds actually look pretty normal, from what I understand. I mean, I've never actually held one, but they don't look spectacular, right? The diamonds that you see when you go buy a diamond are, they've been through a process to get to the point where they're at. And so you really have to be able to think about, I think this is probably where the expression, the diamond in the rough, right? I mean, diamonds look pretty rough, to be honest. And so you have to work the diamond to get it to the point you want it to be at. And like, the moral of that story, right, is the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. But the reality is you still got to mow it. And so if you are wanting something that somebody else has in terms of outcome, start thinking about, what can I do individually myself to get that same outcome? Not trying to copy somebody else's thing, but look at what you currently have and start thinking about how you can, get what you really want. And so anyway, as I had indicated, I did a few other videos, and, I would be remiss if I didn't just take, a short moment and kind of unpack it a little bit. And as I'm like thinking about, that, I was like, maybe I should like give you a little bit more juice, if you will, as to why you should go back and watch those videos. I think myself is included in this, right? But I've seen many people try to find success by doing the 4 phases that I think are really important to having a solid workflow. They try to do those 4 phases in reverse order, and oftentimes they try to do it on their own. And so that's like basically trying to problem solve your way to finding the strategy that you want And then, from that strategy, you're going to find, your professional pursuit. And in that professional pursuit, you'll discover yourself. That's insane. That doesn't make any sense at all. And in fact, if you try to do it that way, all it's going to do is increase the amount of time it takes you to get to the place where you really want to be. Because when you finally get to the point of like discovering who you are, you'll discover that, not all the time, but often, when you discover who you are, all of those other things don't line up. So when you're like in tune with your authentic self, that is the place where you need to build things from. Yeah. The Japanese refer to that as Ikigai. And, really truly understanding your authentic self is critical. If this is resonating for you, drop a like, drop a dislike. If you don't, if this is like terrible and you don't like it, drop a dislike, drop a comment. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to know what you're thinking. One kind of like think about how to wrap this conversation up. I think I'll leave it with some questions that you should really be asking yourself on a fairly regular basis. Yeah. I think a lot of us have heard of the PDCA cycle, the Deming cycle. And what a lot of us don't realize is that there's another cycle that needs to be part of our work, and that is the SDCA, the standardized do check act cycle. That's a critical piece of our workflows that we often leave out. I'm not going to get into detail on that today, but basically the premise is, if you don't have a standard that you're starting from, it's extremely difficult to make any improvements. I mean, that's just the bottom line. But let's get to the questions. So the questions that I would be recommending you ask yourself, questions I ask myself often, is, so question number one, what no's, under quotation, right? What no's do I need to remove from my vocabulary? Meaning of the, time, money, technology, whatever, of those things that you believe, I need all these things. What of those can you remove from your vocabulary so that you can increase the flow of the work, right? Second question, how might I start to think about my workflow, my process differently? How can I kind of come at it from a different angle, right? The next question, do I need to practice the things I am doing more to become more proficient? Oof. Right? I mean, we think about how we train individuals to work on a process, and we identify gaps in skill or talent and say, oh, we have some training that we can give you on that. Do you lack some of the skills that you need in order to be successful? That's a huge thing to think about, right? Because if you don't have the skills, which is, by the way, the last question I would recommend you ask, if you don't have the skills, how in the world are you going to practice well, right? They always say, well, practice makes perfect. Well, I think that's kind of bullshit, right? What I think is, you need to think about the perfect type of practice in order to get better, okay? Because I don't think perfect exists. I think it's just a continuum that we are moving along. And in order to really get to where you really want to go, you have to think about, how can I continually improve the practice I'm doing in order to get the results I want, in order to get the outcomes I want. Because, if you don't kind of think about it that way, you're not going to get to where you really want to go. And I think if you take a step back and realize that if you haven't taken the time to discover your authentic self, to discover the professional pursuit that you want and the direction you need to head in to get there, this is going to be really hard for you, right? Understand what you stand for. Understand what standing for it means. How do you communicate to that to others around you? And, think about how that informs the path that you're on as an individual. Because if you don't regularly take time to do that, you could be the best kaizen expert in the world, and it's not going to amount to a hill of beans, because you're not going to be applying it in a way that's actually going to be helpful and actually going to get you the results you want. I've had the opportunity in my career to spend some time with a man by the name of Sensei Chihiro Nakao. And if you're not familiar with him, he, I believe, founded the consultant group Shingajitsu. And Shingajitsu is, basically a consulting group that helps organizations apply the power of kaizen. And one of his quotes that I had the opportunity and was fortunate enough to hear him say was, you must do lots of trial and error. Don't consider error as failure. Never give up. And so, I think I'm going to leave you with that, right? Think about the fact that, along this journey, there's going to be trial and error. There's going to be things that don't go the way we thought they were going to go. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with making a mistake. There's nothing wrong with what the world calls failure. I call that learning. So if you want to learn more about how you can apply this kind of thinking to your workflow, if you want to learn more about how you can work with me, if you want to work with me, I have a coaching program that's called The Obvious Route. And in that program, I work with clients to help them discover first what brings them life meaning, right? So we figure out what is your true authentic self, your Ikigai. And then I help them develop a professional pursuit. And that flows from that authentic self, that flows out of that thing where you find meaning in life. And from that place, that's where we design a personal strategy to help you get there. And then once you understand that, then we talk about the problem solving piece, the critical thinking piece. This is where this is where I tend to annoy you a little bit, but that's okay. I mean, that's how we get better. That's how we get to the place where we want to be. I've had coaches that annoy me often, but I know that it's because there's pieces of me that need to change. That's the rub, right? The rub isn't them. It has nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with me. Anyway, visit my website. There's a link in the show notes. It's just www.stevebeauchamp.com. Go check it out. And I look forward to hearing from you. Send me an email, send me some type of contact. And I hope that this video brought value to you, and I hope that you got a lot out of it. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.